Okay, so I want to see if this resonates with you all. When I moved to Arizona, someone described Arizona politics to me in a way that kind of makes sense. Well, as much as state politics can make sense. So they said, you need to remember two things. First, that Arizona was proudly the last state in the continental United States. They waited until everyone else had joined, and then, and only then, they voted to become part of the U.S. They wanted to be the last holdout. Arizona wanted to be special, right? And second, this is the land of rugged individualism, of cowboys riding into the sunset, of don't tell me what I can do with my land. Honestly, when I think of Arizona, those two things, independent holdouts and rugged individualism, many of things in this state make sense. It doesn't make it right, but they give the unique brand of weird politics of Arizona a little bit more context. Are you all finding that? Do those things make sense for you all here too? We are continuing our series on the characteristics of white supremacy culture as we live into our commitment to our newest eighth principle to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. We've talked about a whole bunch of things, perfectionism, urgency, and today we are talking about individualism. But first, let us talk about why we are talking about the characteristics of white supremacy culture and how they keep us from being connected. What I've loved about this series is that it has created conversations with all of you. People are referencing the different characteristics in conversations with me and others, and we're getting the opportunity to build the conversations. One of the questions that I've heard from several of you is something along the lines of, I get how these are part of our culture. I get that they might be negative, but how are they white supremacist? And how do embracing their antidotes help us to create a less racist and more inclusive world? So I'm going to try a different way of explaining this and see if I can create a through line for you. The culture in the United States and much of the Western world, something happened on my Zoom and I got a pop-up and I'm hoping that you all can still see me. The culture in the United States and much of the Western world comes from a white Eurocentric culture. While early civilization started with a dominant culture in Asia and Africa, after the Roman Empire, much of the dominant culture came from Europe and then expanded to the Americas along with others with colonialization. Part of this colonialization was to intentionally spread this culture to the savages, quotes. The prevailing thought was that white Eurocentric culture was the right culture and the more civilized culture. Whether we are white or brown or black or any combination thereof, this is the culture that we have grown up in and accepted as the norm. The problem is that this culture inherently is dehumanizing to folks who do not come from white Eurocentric lines. And the specific traits that we've been talking about, perfectionism, urgency, worship of the written word, the expectation of comfort, and now individualism, all help support that white culture is better than other cultures. And we've all brought that into that thought. We've bought into it somehow, one way or another. Our dominant culture is dehumanizing. And dehumanization leads to separation, and separation is the key component to racism. And therefore, we've got to go back. We've got to go back to the basis of all of it, this culture, and pull it apart and recreate it. Breaking down the elements of this white supremacist culture and focusing on the antidotes help us to connect to each other more and connect to ourselves to make ourselves more whole. We are alienated from ourselves and from each other. So we need to find ways to make ourselves more whole. as a society, and as individuals. So let's talk a little bit about individualism, because if there is a time, people, that we should realize that individualism is toxic, it should be now. In the pandemic, we've realized that one person alone can't slow a curve or stop a transmission, that it takes a community. In the war in Ukraine, we are understanding just how small our world is, that the consequence of Putin's aggression, and we are understanding this from the small ways to the big ways, to the cost of gas at our pumps. That one person's action can literally create an environmental, humanitarian, and nuclear disaster. We understand that one protester can take a stand, but when millions gather together, they can make us rethink our whole policing system. We know this, especially as religious liberals. We understand that we are all connected, but yet we cannot deny that our culture is all about individualism. There is this story that we can make it on our own without help. We can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. This is the part of so many narratives in this country, so many hero journeys of so many of our movies and our TV shows, so much of our own thinking. This cultural attachment to individualism leads to a toxic denial of our essential interdependence and the reality that we are all in this literally together. So let's talk a little bit about how this shows up. And for this one, I'm going to talk specifically about how it plays in race. For white people, it often looks like this. I'm not racist. I'm a good person. Yeah, I'm white. I'm a really good person. White folks demand to be seen as individuals and not as a part of the larger white group. Furthermore, when we talk about I'm not racist, I'm a good person in an individual way, we are failing to recognize the larger systems of racism and oppression. When we look at ourselves only as individual, it blinds us to broader systems that have always existed within our society and our institutions. The I'm not racist is the most harmful, most individual statement in our collective society that is racist. Now, there's a double-edged sword to this, because while white folks often demand to be seen as individuals, black folks are often lumped into a group. Whether we call that minorities or inner city or those Black Lives Matter protesters, they are seen as a group. And while white folks demand that individualism, black folks are often criticized for not being team players. In other words, there's repercussions for black people when they act as that individual that white folks feel entitled to, and when that individualism threatens the team. You all okay? Taking a breath? You all right? Okay. I'm okay. You good, Sam? Preach, sister. Individualism is what makes us say, I've got this, and head off to do things as the metaphorical Lone Ranger, rather than asking for help or collaborating, which always, as Sam said, creates better solutions. It is what makes us believe that asking for help is a burden or a sign of weakness. Individualism is very connected to perfectionism. It's this idea that there is only one way of doing things and that the weight of doing it right is resting solely on our own shoulders. That's wrong, by the way. And it is very related to feeling in control. If we don't do it ourselves, then we lose control. And our society does not want us to lose control. Individualism can lead to charismatic leaders being put on pedestals. It leads to separation and accountability that has resulted in such travesties as the Catholic molestation crisis, authoritarian leaders around the world, most notably Putin in Russia, and someone I'm not going to say here in the United States, who are the epitome of authoritarian individualism. The idea that I alone can fix this. Individualism makes us think that leaders are the people out front who are leading by themselves, and that folks who are stepping back to make room for other voices are somehow weaker. Individualism most concretely leads to separation, to loneliness, to lack of connection. And that lack of connection degrades our sense of humanity of others. Do you all see it? Do you see it? Do you see how individualism has pervaded our reality from every angle? Do you see how it is dominant in politics and religion, in business and movies, in our families? Do you see it in yourself? So what is the antidote for this? What is the solution? Like many addictions, we must be able to name it as a problem in ourselves, in our society first. And I want you to be on the lookout for this going it alone mindset in yourselves and others. Think of it as being countercultural. We're good at that thinking, aren't we? We like it. If we say, ooh, the not going alone is countercultural, then maybe we can do that. And when we start to feel like we need to do something on our own, stop. Think about who we can involve and how much better it will be if we do. Get rid of this notion that we are bothering people by involving them. And notice when you see teamwork and collaboration happening and recognize it. Give credit to all of the workers who are involved, not just the leaders. And then here's the hard part. Those of us who wear dominant identities, those of us who are white or who identify with this gender that they were assigned with at birth, or who are heterosexual, or who are neurotypical, or who are male, or who are financially privileged. You all get to understand that when you are an individual, but you are also part of these dominant groups. And then you have the opportunity to understand the toxicity that can come with those dominant identities. Yes, they can be toxic. How? Because those identities are often seen as both better and normal. And because that is the case, any other identity is seen as less than or abnormal, inherently. Not because of something you did, but because they are dominant identities. We see how this is playing out. We see how the right wing of the Republican Party openly is claiming white identity as better. White pride means that whiteness is being seen as the better race, which means that any other race is less than. Now, it used to be veiled. We used to see this like subversively said, kind of dog whistles along the side. It's not even veiled anymore. It is so very overt. And it can be because the majority of their constituents are white and agree with this idea. We're seeing it in the Don't Say Gay legislation, the anti-trans bans in school sports and bathrooms. It is inherently saying that being cisgendered is normal, and therefore anything else is abnormal and can therefore be banned, legislated, or controlled. So what I'm giving you is the opportunity to critically look at the dominant cultures that we're a part of and to recognize their toxicity in our lives. That is not to mean that we need to be ashamed of them, because that doesn't do us any good. But we need to see how they are keeping us from being separated and not equal to others. And my fellow white folks, let's let go of the "but I'm not racist" line. Okay? That is inherently a classic individualism response. Let us look communally and acknowledge that racism is everywhere, baked into our systems and our legislature and our thoughts. In this case, literally, it isn't about you. Don't make it about you. And ironically, the only way that we can do that is to individually refuse to make it about us. My friends, I'm appealing to you to see that individualism is toxic. And it is a core characteristic that leads to racism and oppression. When we are the center of the universe, then inherently everyone stands outside in a lesser than place. And when a whole bunch of individuals feel like they are entitled in their superiority, then you are left reinforcing those dominant cultures with all of the power. We are all connected. All of us need all of us to make it. We are not islands. Surely we know this by now. All of us need all of us to make it.